What would you do if a 7-year-old girl walked into your company's lobby alone, carrying nothing but a resume and a drawing of her dream office? Would you laugh? Would you call security? Or would you stop long enough to listen? When powerful CEO Grant Whitmore found himself face to face with June Keller, a barefoot little girl searching for help while her mother lay unconscious in a hospital bed, he didn't realize this moment would unravel the very legacy he built. But what began as a corporate curiosity turned into a reckoning, one that exposed hidden policies, buried grief, and the harsh cost of pretending heart and business can't coexist. Who was this mother no one expected? Why did her presence threaten the foundation of a billion-dollar empire? And how could one small child become the spark that reignited an entire company's soul? This isn't just a story about business. It's about what we choose to see and what we leave behind when we finally open our eyes. If this opening moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us tell more stories that matter. Now, let's begin. The revolving glass doors of Calyx Innovations rotated in sync with the flow of power suits and sharp heels, each footstep echoing purpose across the sleek marble floor. Boston's skyline shimmered in the morning sun, mirrored in the reflective facade of the company's 47-story headquarters. But amidst all that polish and motion, she stood still, just 4 feet tall. June Keller adjusted the straps of her lavender backpack. Her soft black curls were pinned back with her favorite navy clip, the one her mother said made her look professional. Her pale yellow cardigan was buttoned to the top, slightly too large for her small frame. Her shoes, scuffed white Mary Janes, tapped nervously as she clutched the leather folder in her arms like a life preserver. "Okay," she whispered to herself. Mom said, "Speak clearly and smile." She stepped forward, head held high, weaving through tall strangers like a paper boat in a concrete river. The security guard blinked down at her in confusion. "Excuse me, sir," June said, straightening her shoulders. "I have a 9 o'clock appointment with Mr. Grant Whitmore." The guard, whose name tag read Paul, raised an eyebrow. "You do? Huh? Are your parents with you?" June shook her head. "My mom was supposed to be, but she's in the hospital. I'm here instead." Paul looked from the girl to the folder, then back again, as if the right angle might make this make sense. "Sweetie, that's not really how interviews work." June took a deep breath. "I know, but Mom stayed up late finishing her proposal. She wanted this job so bad. She's smart and kind, and we really need the health insurance." There was a tremble in her voice at the end, but she didn't let it drop. Her fingers clutched tighter at the folder. Paul opened his mouth, likely to gently steer her toward the exit, when a voice rang out behind them. "What's going on here?" The air shifted. Executives who had just stepped into the lobby slowed their pace. Some even stopped walking, because that voice, low, composed, unmistakably in charge, belonged to Grant Whitmore, founder and CEO of Calyx Innovations. Paul snapped to attention. Mr. Whitmore, this young lady says she has an appointment with you." Grant's gaze dropped, taking in June's determined little frame, her serious expression, the folder clutched to her chest. "I do," June said firmly, stepping closer. "My name is June Keller. My mom is Lena Keller. She was supposed to interview for the strategy analyst position this morning, but she couldn't come." Grant tilted his head, intrigued despite himself. Why couldn't she? June swallowed. She couldn't breathe last night. The ambulance took her to Boston General. They said it's pneumonia. I packed her presentation myself. For a moment, no one moved. Grant's blue-gray eyes remained on her, unreadable. In his early 50s, tall and tailored in a steel blue suit, he looked like someone carved from purpose. His salt and pepper hair was neatly combed back, his tie perfectly aligned, but something in his expression shifted, almost imperceptibly. He turned to Paul. "She's with me." Paul's jaw twitched. "Sir, she's a minor. I don't think neither did I." "Until 30 seconds ago," Grant replied. Then, to June, "Come along." As they walked toward the private elevator, whispers bloomed like static. A child, in the executive tower, inside the elevator. Grant pressed the button for the 42nd floor. June stood silently beside him, watching the numbers light up. Her backpack looked out of place against the steel and glass, like a crayon in a boardroom. "You said your mother's name is Lena Keller," Grant asked. June nodded. "She used to work at West Forge in product strategy. She got laid off when they merged, but she's really good. I helped her practice for today. You helped her, I made the graphs into simpler slides. She has a way of talking too fast when she's nervous. I told her to breathe in 4s like this." She demonstrated a slow inhale and exhale. "It helps." Grant found himself smiling faintly, but genuinely for the first time in days. When the doors opened, his assistant, Mara, looked up in surprise. "Sir, your schedule." "Clear it," Grant said, "but you have the board briefing in 20 minutes. Delay it." Mara blinked, eyes flickering to June. "She's presenting," Grant added. June followed him into the sunlit office, her eyes wide at the sprawling view of Boston Harbor through the floor-to-ceiling windows. She didn't marvel long. She pulled out her mother's folder, took a seat, and carefully laid out the pages in the right order. "Would you like me to start with the case study or the platform redesign strategy?" she asked. Grant leaned back, fingers steepled under his chin. "Whichever you think is stronger." June nodded seriously. "Then I'll start with the redesign." And she did. Not like a child pretending to be an adult, but like someone who had watched her mother fight for too long to let the moment slip. Grant Whitmore hadn't expected to spend his morning watching a child explain market segmentation and software rollout timelines, but here he was, sitting across from his glass-top desk. Little June Keller held up a page with 3 color-coded graphs and began. "My mom used this format because she said your company appreciates efficiency. This chart shows a case study from her previous job. West Forge's Q3 rollout increased app engagement by 21% after she proposed a restructured launch." Grant raised an eyebrow. "You understand what these numbers mean?" June hesitated. "Not all of them, but I know blue is the before column, and green is the one that matters most." Grant leaned back in his chair. The sunlight spilled across June's small hands as she flipped to the next page with practiced care. She worked on this for 2 nights straight. June continued. Even when her chest started hurting, she didn't want to miss today. "So I figured I couldn't let her." The girl's voice didn't waver, but her hands trembled slightly when she reached for the final folder. "This is her presentation outline. It's about predictive insights using user behavior. I helped with the formatting. And she added a slide about your company's core mission. She said it mattered to you. It had been years, maybe a decade, since someone brought up Calyx's mission in an interview, much less remembered it. Most applicants focused on numbers, rankings, funding rounds. Few cared that the original purpose of Calyx was to develop AI tools that elevate human clarity, not replace it. That line had been written by his late wife. Grant looked at June more closely now, not as a child with a folder, but as someone who had seen her mother break and still chose to rise. "You mentioned you need the health insurance," he said, carefully. June nodded. "We have a plan through the state, but it's not enough. Mom's medicine is really expensive, and if she misses work too long, we lose the apartment." The matter-of-fact way she said it made his throat tighten. He turned over a resume page. "How old are you again?" 8.5. Grant let out a breath. "You speak like you're 30. June didn't smile at the compliment. "That's because Mom says I had to grow up a little faster. She says life doesn't always wait." That line cut deeper than it should have. Because Grant Whitmore knew exactly what it felt like when life didn't wait. 12 years ago, his daughter Eva had drowned in a lake behind their Connecticut home. One second she was chasing fireflies. The next, there was silence. He'd been in a meeting. It was always a meeting. The coroner said it had happened fast, but grief didn't. It settled in his bones and hardened into routines: early mornings, long hours, polished windows, and just enough distance between him and anything that could hurt again. And now, here was this girl, sitting in the same chair where billion-dollar venture capitalists had once pitched, with mismatched buttons and unflinching honesty. His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Whitmore," came Mara's voice, "the board is in Conference A. Shall I send your briefing materials down?" He looked at the clock. It was nearly 10. He was 30 minutes late. "No," he said slowly. "Reschedule." There was a pause. "Sir, reschedule the board. I'm busy." He clicked off the intercom before Mara could reply. June blinked at him, unsure. "Did I mess up your day?" He shook his head. "No, June. You've given me a better reason to change it." She stared at him, then tentatively smiled. "Most grown-ups don't like interruptions. Most grown-ups don't listen when they should." A silence settled between them. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that lets things realign. Grant stood, walked to the window, and stared out over the harbor. His reflection hovered against the glass, older than he remembered, more tired than he admitted. He turned back. "June," he said, "your mother, how is she now?" "The nurse said she'll be okay, but she needs rest. Maybe a few more days." He walked back to his desk and picked up the portfolio again. "She's qualified. Very. I can see that. But tell me something. Who's taking care of you right now?" June looked down. "Mrs. Radley from across the hall. She makes toast and tells me stories about the 40s, but she forgets things sometimes." "Do you have anyone else?" She shook her head. Grant tapped the folder slowly. "You said your mom wanted this job because it matters. What did she say about Calyx?" June didn't hesitate. "She said Calyx doesn't just build tech. You build trust, or at least you used to." That last part wasn't meant to sting, but it did. Grant walked toward the door. "Where are we going?" June asked, standing quickly. "To the hospital." "Really, really." June threw her backpack on and followed him, skipping once before stopping herself. Boston General Hospital was a maze of muted colors, antiseptic smells, and fluorescent lights that made even the morning sun feel far away. As they entered through the West Wing, Grant Whitmore moved with a purposeful stride that turned heads. In his tailored navy coat and crisp shirt, He looked completely out of place among the nurses in scrubs and visitors with wrinkled coats. But he didn't seem to notice or care. June Keller kept up beside him, tightly gripping her backpack with both hands. "She's on the 3rd floor," she said. "Room 312. I asked the lady at the front yesterday." Grant nodded and pressed the elevator button. Neither of them spoke as they ascended. When the doors opened, they stepped into a quieter corridor. Soft beeping monitors echoed faintly from behind drawn curtains. Nurses moved like shadows, careful and calm. They reached room 312. Inside, Lena Keller lay propped up in bed, a nasal cannula feeding oxygen through her nose. Her chestnut hair, normally curled and tidy, was pulled back in a loose, messy ponytail. Her skin looked pale, her lips dry. Dark circles bruised the skin beneath her eyes. Still, when she saw June, her back straightened instinctively. "June," she rasped, her voice dry but sharp. "What are you doing here? You're supposed to be with Mrs. Radley." "I am," June said quickly, "but I came to your interview first. This is Mr. Whitmore, the CEO." Lena's eyes flicked to the tall man beside her daughter, and the blood drained from her face. Oh my God! She tried to sit up straighter, groaning slightly from the effort. "You what?" she asked her daughter, her voice weak but stunned. Grant stepped forward. "Your daughter made a powerful case on your behalf. Ms. Keller, I'm Mr. Whitmore. I'm so sorry. I told her not to. I never imagined she did more than imagine." He interrupted gently. "She executed. With grace." Lena's eyes met his. For a moment, she saw only a powerful man in a suit. Then she noticed the faint crease in his brow, the sadness behind his eyes, the way he glanced at June with something too soft to be professional. "I promise I didn't send her," Lena said quietly. "She should have called the office." "I told her, she told me you needed the job," he said, voice even, "that your work was strong and your proposal was important." Lena looked away. "That sounds like her." Grant pulled a chair beside the bed. "Ms. Keller, I looked over your credentials. They're exceptional. They weren't enough for 8 other companies," she replied, her tone tired. "Since the layoff at West Forge, I've had interviews, rejections, and silence. No one wants a single mother. They don't say it, but they ask how I'll handle sick days, or school closures, or late nights. They don't want the liability. And yet you kept applying." Lena gave a half smile. "What choice do I have?" June climbed up on the edge of the hospital bed, careful not to disturb the IV. She leaned against her mother's shoulder and took her hand. The movement was instinctual, practiced, too practiced for a child. "How long have you been doing this?" Grant asked softly. "Doing what? Being everything?" Lena's throat tightened. "Since June was born," she said. "Her father, he left before she was 6 months old. Said I wasn't ambitious enough to keep up with him. I had to choose Chase's job around the country, or give my daughter a stable life. You chose her. Every time." There was a silence, a respectful one. Then Lena added, almost to herself, "It's just been the 2 of us for so long. I've learned to carry it all. But lately, it's been heavier." Grant didn't speak. His hands were folded in his lap, but his posture had changed, more open, less executive. "I'm not asking for favors," Lena said after a moment. "I know what my work is worth. I just haven't had the chance to prove it. That's all." "You're not asking for anything," he said. "You already presented, through June, and it was compelling." She looked down at her daughter, who had drifted slightly to one side, drowsy but awake. She shouldn't have had to. No, she shouldn't have. Another pause. "Ms. Keller," Grant said, standing slowly, "your daughter mentioned your doctor said you'll be discharged soon tomorrow. If my oxygen levels stay up, good. Then we'll conduct your official interview Monday morning. Take the weekend to recover." Lena blinked. "You're serious. I wouldn't waste your time or hers if I wasn't." He pulled out a card from his coat and placed it on the table. "Have billing contact this number. Calyx will cover your stay. Consider it in advance." Lena reached for the card, hand shaking slightly. "I can't accept this. You already did the work. We're just catching up." He turned to leave, but June sat up. "Thank you," she said, her voice small but clear. Grant looked at her. "You made it impossible not to." Grant Whitmore hadn't slept much. His penthouse, overlooking the Charles River, was quiet to the point of echoing. It always had been. That morning, it felt like the walls themselves were holding their breath. The folder June had brought sat on his kitchen counter. He'd read through every line again after returning home from the hospital. Then, once more, after midnight, every certification, every timeline, every footnote. It wasn't just competent, it was outstanding. But what kept him up wasn't Lena's résumé. It was the drawing tucked behind the final page, crayoned lines. A little girl with curly hair holding hands with her mother. Above them, the word team floated in a shaky purple bubble. It reminded him of another drawing, one he hadn't looked at in years. He crossed the room to a drawer he hadn't opened since moving into this place 6 years ago. Inside was a wooden frame, dusty but intact. Behind the glass, a stick-figure family. A man, a woman, and a little girl with scribbled curls, labeled underneath Daddy, Mommy, me, Ava. He sat with the frame in his lap, suddenly 20 pounds heavier with memory. His daughter had drawn that the week before the accident. It had hung in his old office for years until grief made it unbearable. That grief had turned into work, and that work had turned into Calyx. Now, here he was, sitting in a designer kitchen, holding 2 pictures drawn by 2 little girls, one gone, one very much alive, the past and the present, the grief and the echo. The knock on his door the next morning pulled him from his fog. It was Mara, his assistant, holding coffee and confusion. "You canceled the board briefing yesterday," she said gently, "and cleared your schedule today. That's unprecedented." "I needed time," he replied. Mara placed the coffee down, but didn't leave. She'd worked for him long enough to know when silence meant more than paperwork. "Sir, people are asking questions. About the girl." He looked up. "Let them. She was seen in the building, with you, and with no official reason. She was presenting." Mara blinked. "Sir." She presented her mother's pitch. Mara sat, stunned. "You let a child." "She was more organized than most analysts we've hired this quarter," he said, not entirely joking. Mara studied him. "Is this about the Keller woman?" Or, Grant didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, "It's about both." Later that afternoon, June returned to Calyx, with Lena still recovering. Grant had arranged a car to pick her up after school. She arrived at the lobby, wearing a clean sweatshirt and jeans, her backpack bouncing as she walked. Mara met her with a hesitant smile. "Welcome back, Miss Keller." "Hi," June beamed. "Mr. Whitmore said I could do my homework in the Innovation Lounge today." "That's right. Mara nodded, then glanced at Grant. "Your 3P, is waiting. Want me to handle it?" He shook his head. "Push them 30 minutes." As June settled into the corner room with floor-to-ceiling windows and modular desks, she pulled out her math notebook and some colored pencils. She also pulled a folded page from her backpack, unfolded it, flattened it on the desk. It was another drawing. This one was a floor plan. The lounge reimagined, with beanbags, a reading nook, labeled cabinets, bright colors, a corner titled Homework Hideout. Grant stepped inside quietly, watching her concentrate. "What's that?" he asked. June looked up. "It's just ideas. This place is cool, but kinda cold. You should have more stuff for kids. What if someone's mom works late? You think Calyx should have a space for kids?" June shrugged. "Well, families work late, and kids need places too." Grant folded his arms, looking at the plan. "Do you have a name for it? Maybe?" She tapped her pencil. "The bridge room, like between grown-up world and kid world." He stared at her for a moment, stunned by the simple genius of it. That night, Grant sat in his office and reopened the internal blueprint files of the Calyx building. Then he pulled out June's plan. The dimensions weren't perfect, the lines wobbled, but the idea was there. A bridge. Meanwhile, across the city, Lena Keller sat by the hospital window, her breathing steadier, but her mind racing. She had called Grant's office to thank him, but the line went to voicemail. She'd tried again and then stopped. Was this real or a moment of pity? Was she being swept into something she didn't understand? And what if she failed? What if her body didn't bounce back fast enough? She stared out the window. Her reflection stared back, tired but alert. "I didn't survive all of this," she whispered, "just to fall apart now." By Monday morning, Lena Keller was no longer hooked to oxygen, but exhaustion still clung to her like static. She stood in front of the mirror inside her apartment, adjusting the collar of a navy blue blazer that was 2 seasons out of date and half a size too tight. Her dress pants had faded slightly at the knees, but they were clean, pressed, respectable. June, sitting on the edge of the bed, watched silently, her socked feet dangling off the edge. "You don't have to be nervous," June said, trying to sound older than her years. "I'm not," Lena replied, but they both knew that wasn't true. There was too much riding on this. Calyx Innovations looked even more intimidating when Lena walked in without June. The marble floors were colder, the hum of productivity louder. It had been a week since she last stood in the lobby, dizzy from pneumonia and hospital air. Now, she was here under her own power, but barely. She gave her name to the receptionist, and before she could take a breath, Mara appeared, professional and composed. "This way. Ms. Keller. Mr. Whitmore is waiting." The elevator doors opened, and Lena hesitated for just a moment before stepping inside. Grant was already there. He stood near the back, arms crossed, gazing at the descending numbers like he didn't trust them. When he noticed her, he offered a nod. "Miss Keller, Mr. Whitmore." Silence. The doors closed. The hum of the elevator filled the space. Then Lena spoke, voice quiet but firm. "I appreciate you keeping the interview, and for everything you did for June, and for me. I didn't expect it." Grant's expression softened. "Barely. I didn't expect her either." They stood in stillness again until the elevator stopped. As the doors slid open, Lena turned to him. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, her words measured. "I don't want special treatment. Not because I'm a single mother, not because I got sick, and not because my daughter's charming. I want to earn this." Grant looked at her. "You already have my attention. Miss Keller, what you earn from here on will be yours." She exhaled, a small, private release of tension. But as they stepped onto the 42nd floor, Lena couldn't ignore the stares, not just curious, calculating, from assistants, from department heads, and, worst of all, from the woman waiting at the glass conference room door, Vivienne Shaw, head of risk and compliance. Vivienne extended a cool hand. "Ms. Keller, welcome." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. The interview itself was both familiar and foreign. Lena answered every question with practiced professionalism. Her voice regained its strength. She laid out product lifecycle proposals, spoke of agility frameworks, and pitched a 3-phase redesign of Calyx's consumer onboarding system. Grant didn't speak often, but when he did, his questions were direct, surgical. Still, Lena held her ground, until Vivienne leaned forward, her tone dipped in polished concern. "One final question. Ms. Keller, in your previous roles, there were several periods of work absence noted. Could you explain the pattern?" Lena paused. She could lie, or soften it, but she didn't. "My daughter had medical complications when she was younger. I chose to prioritize her care. I arranged backups, completed work remotely when possible, and always met deliverables. But yes, I've had to navigate single parenthood." Vivienne nodded slowly. "And if another emergency were to occur, I have contingency plans, sitters, after-school programs, a neighbor network, and, more important, resilience." Grant's eyes didn't leave her. Vivienne's pen moved, recording something, or nothing. The interview concluded with formal thank yous, handshakes, a professional nod from Vivienne, and a curious glance from another executive Lena didn't recognize, Harlan Grove, the CFO, who had remained quiet the entire time. Grant walked Lena to the elevator again. This time, they were alone. "I thought it went well," she said, without looking at him. It did. But he hesitated. This building, this culture, was built by people who don't like change, especially when it walks in with a child in tow. Lena looked at him. "Are you warning me I'm asking you if you're ready? For what? For this place to push back?" She smiled, quietly. "Mr. Whitmore, I raised a daughter on expired groceries and startup deadlines. This building doesn't scare me." Grant blinked. Then, for the first time since they met, he laughed an actual full sound. As the elevator opened, Lena stepped in. Before the doors closed, she turned and said, "But if I get this job, we're fixing the break room coffee. It tastes like regret." Grant shook his head, duly noted, and then she was gone. But the weight of her words remained. It didn't take long. By the following Thursday, whispers were no longer whispers. Inside Calyx Innovations, the executive floor buzzed not with progress, but with suspicion. "That's her. Right. The single mom from the hospital. Grant's been seen walking her kid through the strategy wing. They say he canceled a board meeting for the girls' drawing." The gossip was fueled not by what people knew, but by what they assumed. And by the time Vivienne Shaw slid into Harlan Grove's corner office, the assumptions had already crystallized into strategy. "She's a liability," Vivienne said flatly, setting a file on his desk. Harlan didn't look up immediately. His eyes were on a quarterly report, but when he did glance at her, it was with the weariness of someone used to cleaning up messes before they exploded. "You're talking about Lena Keller," he said. "I'm talking about optics," Vivian replied. "The CEO hand-selects a job candidate who's already been seen with a child in our executive lounge. It blurs every line we're supposed to uphold. She's qualified." Vivian smirked. "That's never been enough. Not here. And certainly not with Grant." Harlan leaned back. "You think he's compromised? I think he's grieving out loud. Through someone else's family." That sentence hung in the air for a beat too long. Vivian tapped the folder. Her file, including absence history, medical leave, even a disciplinary note from West Forge about unnotified scheduled disruptions. Nothing scandalous, but enough to frame a pattern. Harlan exhaled. "This is a dangerous road." "It's a familiar one," Vivian said, voice cool. "And if we don't raise the issue now, the board will wonder why we waited." That same afternoon, Lena was reviewing departmental onboarding flows in the temporary strategy workspace Grant had set up for her. It wasn't official yet, but everyone knew, even if HR hadn't formally announced her role, her presence was now routine. Still, her email notifications pinged with something strange. Subject: HR Advisory Review. Immediate response required. She clicked. "Ms. Keller, please be advised that a formal advisory review is being opened regarding your onboarding circumstances. This is a routine matter involving candidate executive proximity and procedural exceptions." Lena sat back. Her pulse ticked up. A review? She hadn't even started officially. Meanwhile, June was in her usual spot, the corner of the Innovation Lounge, where a makeshift reading nook now held 3 beanbags, a math workbook, and a bulletin board titled Bridge Room. Concept Planning. She was drawing a tree, not just any tree. Each branch had a label: marketing, engineering, people, clients. At the base of the trunk, she'd written "Families Grow Companies." When Grant walked in, he paused at the door. "Did you make that?" he asked. June turned. "It's our tree. Like a mission thing. Mom says roots matter." Grant crouched beside her. "You know, no one ever made me a tree before." She looked at him. "Serious. Is Mom in trouble?" Grant stiffened. "Why do you ask that?" "Because she got quiet when she read that email today. She always gets quiet before something hard." He didn't answer. Not yet. Later that night, Lena knocked on his office door. "You knew?" she asked, holding up the printed HR email. "I just found out this morning." "Vivian," she said. "Yes." Lena sat down. "You said this place would push back. I didn't think it'd be this fast." Grant hesitated, then said quietly, "They see me as a liability, too." She gave a humorless laugh. "At least we're aligned." He slid a file across the table. "This is the data you compiled on Agile migration frameworks. It's being reviewed for a cross-department pilot. That's not charity. That's results." Lena stared at him. "That won't stop the rumors." "No, but it strengthens your case." She leaned forward. "I don't want to be your story. Grant, I don't want to be the woman who healed the CEO or the heartstring headline. I want to work." He nodded. "You deserve to." They sat in silence, interrupted only by the distant hum of elevator cables. Then Lena added, almost a whisper, "I've been invisible for years, to employers, to the system. But my daughter sees me. I don't want to go back to being unseen." Grant looked at her, something raw flickering across his face. "You're not invisible here." At that moment, down the hall, Vivian entered Harlan's office again. This time, she had a folder labeled Media Leads. "We leak it now," she said. Harlan's jaw tightened. "That's a line." "Vivian." "No," she said, opening the folder. "It's a mirror. Grant's been protected for too long. Let the public see the man behind the curtain." Harlan hesitated, then, slowly, regretfully, he nodded. "Let's prepare the statement." The headline dropped at 6:03 a.m. sharp, "Grief or Grooming. Calyx CEO's unusual relationship with single mother raises internal concerns" by Marianne Quill, Business Watch Online. It spread like wildfire. Within 20 minutes, the Calyx scandal was trending regionally. The article made no direct accusations, but it didn't have to. It was expertly written to suggest, not state. It detailed CEO Grant Whitmore's sudden mentoring of an unnamed female applicant, his emotional favoritism, and the mysterious presence of a child in the executive lounge. It implied blurred boundaries, impropriety, emotional instability. It even referenced the tragic death of his wife and daughter, calling it unresolved trauma with boardroom consequences. By 7:12 a.m., Lena's phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Messages from old colleagues, from her former West Forge manager, from a friend she hadn't spoken to in years, and worst of all, from June's school. Apparently, several parents had begun to circulate the article. One had even asked if June would be removed from the building. The principal had called to ask, "Is everything okay at home?" Lena stood in the kitchen, phone still in her hand, heart pounding in her ears. June entered, rubbing her eyes. "Mom." Lena knelt. "Sweetheart, there's something going around online. Something about Mr. Whitmore and about me. Is it bad? Some people might say things that aren't true, but we're okay. You're okay." June looked at her, wise beyond her years. "Is he okay?" Lena blinked. "I don't know." At Calyx headquarters, the atmosphere was scorched. Phones rang nonstop. The PR department scrambled to release a neutral statement. Clients called for clarification. Journalists parked outside the lobby, hoping for a photo, a quote, a misstep, in the heart of the chaos. Grant stood at the window of his office, staring out over the skyline he'd built his reputation in. He didn't move, didn't speak, just read the article again and again. His grief, once private, had been turned into a weapon. And the worst part, some of it was true. He had seen his daughter in June. He had been emotionally invested. He had changed policies, canceled meetings, made exceptions because something about Lena and her child pulled him back to a version of himself he thought had died. But he hadn't manipulated. He hadn't exploited. He hadn't crossed any line except the one between silence and sincerity. His intercom buzzed. "Grant," Mara said, voice unusually urgent. "Vivian and Harlan just called for an emergency board meeting. 4 p.m. Grant closed his eyes. "They want Lena present, too." Lena showed up at Calyx that afternoon, dressed simply, black slacks, white blouse, hair pinned back. Her face betrayed no fear, but her hand shook as she gripped her folder of documents. June was at home, with Mrs. Radley, shielded, for now, inside the conference room. The board was already seated when she entered. Grant stood at the head of the table, arms folded. Vivian Shaw wore a navy-sheath dress and a smile that didn't blink. Harlan Grove looked away as Lena passed. The room was too quiet. Vivian began. "We appreciate you joining us. Ms. Keller, given recent media coverage, we're compelled to assess both the public impact and the internal decisions that have brought us here." Lena sat, calm. "Of course." Harlan cleared his throat. "While your qualifications are not in question, the appearance of special treatment, I understand," Lena said, cutting him off gently. "But, if I may, before you begin your assessment, I have a question of my own." The room paused. "Who leaked personal information about Mr. Whitmore's family to the press?" Vivian's lips parted in faux surprise. "Ms. Keller, this meeting is about your role." "It's about ethics," Lena said, louder now, "and that leak about his wife and daughter was deeply personal. Private. No HR file includes that. So, where did it come from?" Grant remained still. Lena looked at him, then continued. "Because if this board is questioning someone's judgment, perhaps it should first examine its own integrity." Vivian's expression cracked for a fraction of a second. Then Mara entered. She handed printed copies to each board member, metadata from an internal email chain. She said simply, there, in black and white, was proof. The article had been prepped 3 days prior, and the source Vivian Shaw's corporate email. She stood, sputtering. "This is absurd. Anyone could have accessed the authentication logs show the IP address, timestamp, and device." Grant said coldly, "It wasn't a breach. It was deliberate." The room went still. Harlan pushed back from the table. "Vivian, I was protecting this company," she snapped. "He's compromised. She's compromised. Grant didn't blink. You're terminated. Effective immediately." Security entered the room before she could argue further. She looked at Lena once, pure fury, then was gone. After the meeting, Lena remained seated. Everyone else had left, except Grant. "I should have protected you better," he said quietly. "You did," she replied. "You just didn't see the angle of attack." He sat across from her. "I never meant for this to hurt you. Or June. I know," she said. "But it did." They sat there in silence, wounded, but not defeated. "We keep going?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "We keep going." By Friday morning, the lobby of Calyx Innovations no longer buzzed with rumor. It was silent. The scandal had shifted from media fodder to internal reckoning. Vivian Shaw's sudden dismissal had sent shockwaves through every department. The employees whispered less, but watched more. Watched Grant Whitmore, specifically, wondered what he'd do next. At 9:00 a.m. sharp, an unexpected calendar invite appeared in every inbox. Subject Town Hall, 10 a.m., main atrium. Required for all staff. CEO addressing organizational direction. At 10 on the dot, Grant walked onto the stage of the sun-drenched atrium. There was no teleprompter, no fancy backdrop, just a podium, a quiet room, and more than 300 employees staring at him, some nervous, some skeptical, most unsure. He looked out over them and began. "No slide decks today," he said, voice calm, "no corporate updates, just a truth that's overdue." The room shifted. "I lost my wife and daughter 12 years ago. A car accident, sudden, final. I buried them both the same week I filed incorporation papers for Calyx." A gasp escaped from somewhere in the back. Grant continued. "I built this company on precision, on results, on control, because it made grief easier to manage. But somewhere along the way, I forgot why I started Calyx in the first place, to create tools that help humans, not just systems. He paused, letting the silence speak. Last month, a little girl walked into our lobby with her mother's résumé in her backpack. She wasn't here to ask for favors. She was here to fight for her mom. Her courage reminded me of the humanity we've been missing. Murmurs moved like wind through the crowd. Grant held up a folder. Inside, here is a proposal. Not from a boardroom, from an employee. One you've likely already heard about, June Keller. She suggested adaptive scheduling frameworks and parent-forward policy changes. Some faces stiffened. Some nodded. She wasn't advocating for exceptions. She was exposing our blind spots. He set the folder down gently. Today, I'm initiating a pilot program, a family-forward initiative designed to test flexible scheduling, emergency childcare support, and performance-based tracking, not presence-based. He scanned the room again. You want to know if this is because of guilt, grief, a single mother? No, it's because systems should evolve, and we can't call ourselves innovative if we're too afraid to change. Silence, then, slowly, applause began, tentative at first, then stronger. After the town hall, Lena sat in a quiet hallway, her back against the glass, folder open on her knees. She hadn't expected that. She hadn't even been warned. Mara found her first. He wrote the whole speech himself, didn't tell anyone. Lena blinked. He just told them. Mara smiled. He didn't tell them. He dared them. That afternoon, June returned to her usual spot in the Innovation Lounge. But this time, she wasn't alone. 2 children twins sat beside her, their mother. A software engineer from Calyx's West team stood nearby. Unsure if this was allowed, Grant approached. It's allowed, he said gently. It's encouraged. He looked down at June. How's the bridge room blueprint coming? June grinned. We added snacks, healthy ones, but I said 1 cookie per day should be okay. Grant nodded solemnly. I approve of that policy. The other children giggled. Lena entered, pausing at the doorway, taking it in. Her daughter, surrounded by light, by opportunity, by welcome. Grant saw her. She belongs here, he said. Lena nodded. So do you. Later that night, Grant and Lena stood on the rooftop deck of Calyx's executive tower. The city glowed beneath them. You broke protocol today, Lena said, sipping from a paper cup. I broke a pattern, he replied. There's a difference. She looked at him, eyes soft but steady. It's going to get harder before it gets easier. You know that, right? I do. They're still watching you, waiting for the next mistake. I know. She turned to him fully. And you're still going to keep me here, even if it costs you more. He didn't hesitate. Yes. A long silence stretched between them. Finally, she asked. Why? Grant answered without looking away. Because this time, I see the storm coming, and I'd rather stand in it with you than hide from it alone. Her breath caught in her chest. The wind whipped her hair slightly, and in that moment, she saw the man not as a CEO, but as a human being. Not broken, but breaking free. The Monday following the town hall, the boardroom at Calyx Innovations felt colder than usual. 12 leather-backed chairs, 11 stern faces, and 1 thick folder sitting unopened in front of Grant Whitmore. Harlan Grove cleared his throat. This isn't a disciplinary hearing, he said. It's a conversation about leadership continuity. Grant didn't flinch. let's call it what it is. Harlan, a transition proposal. The CFO hesitated. Yes. He opened the folder. Based on recent events, your public vulnerability, the shift in policy direction, and the media coverage, it's been recommended that you begin a 6-month transition into an advisory role. Grant scanned the pages. At the bottom, interim CEO, Harlan Grove proposed. Let me guess, Grant said. The board is worried I'm building a company with too much heart and not enough spine. We're worried you're building it around one story, Harlan said, and one woman. Her name is Lena Keller, Grant replied, and her story is a reflection of thousands. She's become a symbol. Another board member chimed in. And symbols can be dangerous when they drive policy. She didn't ask to be a symbol, Grant said. She asked for a job. And now she has a child in our lounges, 5 employees bringing kids to work, and competitors asking if we've turned into a daycare. Grant leaned forward. Productivity is up 12%, retention up 18%. Engagement scores have never been higher. You want numbers? I have them. You want culture? I'm building it. Harlan's jaw tightened. At what cost? Grant stood. I've been CEO here for 15 years. I made this company profitable, relevant, and human. And if you want to talk about cost, let's talk about the price of pretending people don't have families, or hearts, or reasons to need flexibility. Silence. I'll consider your proposal, he said quietly, but I haven't made my decision. That evening, as the sky over Boston turned amber, Grant found himself knocking on the door of Lena's apartment. She opened it in jeans and a loose gray t-shirt. Her hair was up, face bare, expression guarded. Everything okay? She asked. I need your honesty, he said. She stepped aside. Inside, the apartment was small but warm. Books stacked on the coffee table, a half-finished puzzle on the floor, June's shoes by the door. They sat across from each other. Grant explained the board's offer, the vote looming, the pressure mounting. And what are you thinking? Lena asked. He stared at his hands. I've spent years being the man everyone expected, efficient, controlled, untouchable. But I don't know if I can be him anymore. And you don't know if you can be this new version either, she said. He looked at her. That's the part no one talks about, she added softly. Not just the risk of change, but the loss of who you used to be, even if that person wasn't whole. He swallowed. If I step down, the Family Forward initiative might die. If you stay, they'll come after you harder. A pause. Do you want me to transfer? She asked. I will. I can step back, give you space to lead without the shadow of us. No, he said immediately. That would feel like losing something I haven't even found yet. Lena blinked. He stood, walked to the window. The city shimmered like stardust. I used to think leadership meant silence, distance. Now I think it means presence. But I'm scared. Lena, I'm scared that if I fight for this and lose, you won't lose alone, she said, rising. He turned. She walked to him, stopped a few feet away, close enough for honesty, far enough for truth. Your fear means you care, she said. That doesn't make you weak. That makes you ready. He nodded slowly, the tension in his shoulders beginning to soften. June made spaghetti, she added. He smiled. Her famous recipe with extra garlic and too much Parmesan. He laughed quiet, but real. Stay for dinner, Lena said. It wasn't a question. Later that night, after June had gone to bed, They sat on the balcony with wine and quiet. "You said something once," Lena murmured, "that you'd rather stand in the storm than hide from it alone. I remember." She looked at him, eyes steady. "Tomorrow, the storm hits. Just don't forget to look for the calm after." Grant didn't answer with words. He just stayed. At 6:47 the next morning, a sealed manila envelope arrived at Grant Whitmore's desk. No return address, no note, just his name typed on the front A. G. Whitmore Confidential. He recognized the courier service. It was the same used by the legal division of Calyx during internal investigations. He opened it slowly. Inside, copies of archived board minutes, internal memos from 15 years ago, personnel records flagged with asterisks and annotations, all of them bearing the signature of Harlan Grove, back when he was head of operations. The top page read, Employee Family Status Impact Tracking, FY 2008, Strategy to Reduce Turnover Through Selective Hiring of Candidates with Minimal Family Obligations. Further down, Note Maternity Requests, HAST Increased Absenteeism Risk. Prioritize male applicants or single women without children when possible. Grant's eyes locked on the next line. Spousal applicant C. Whitmore flex schedule request recommend denial. He stared at it. C. Whitmore, Caroline, his wife. Caroline had applied for a project strategist role 2 months after Eva was born. Grant had been buried in Series A funding rounds. She had asked him not to interfere. "I want to be hired for my mind, not my marriage," she'd said. She never got the interview. She stopped applying after that. The depression that followed was subtle, then fast, then irreversible. The next page in the file was a company calendar entry, her request for time off the day of the accident. Marked denied, non-essential travel. She'd been driving to a walk-in interview. The truck hit her car just before exit 17. Grant's hands shook. 15 years of guilt suddenly rewired. Not erased, but reframed. He hadn't just failed her with silence. The company he built his legacy had swallowed her. He sat frozen for a long time, until the final page slipped from the envelope, a handwritten note. "You should know what you're really fighting against. A friend." At 9:30, Lena walked into his office. She was scheduled to present updates on the Family Forward pilot metrics, but the moment she saw his face, she knew something had shifted. "You're pale," she said. He looked up slowly. "I need to show you something." She sat beside him as he spread the documents across the desk. She read, word by word. Her fingers clenched around the page with Caroline's name. This was policy, she whispered. Grant nodded, buried, unspoken, but policy nonetheless. Lena leaned back in her chair, and now Harlan wants to take back the company. With this history under his belt, he's counting on no one ever seeing it, Grant replied, and even if they do, he thinks time makes it irrelevant. Does it? Grant looked at her. Does June forget when you say something hurtful, even if it's days later? No, she said. She remembers until you show her something better. Grant tapped the papers gently. Then that's what we do. By 2:00 p.m., the boardroom was full. 11 members, 1 storm. Harlan looked confident, until Grant entered with a folder under his arm. He placed it on the center of the table. These documents outlined discriminatory practices buried inside our operations from over a decade ago, authored, in part, by our own leadership. He slid the file toward Harlan. including rejection of my wife's application under the assumption that her motherhood made her a risk. The room went silent. Board member Linda Tran spoke first. "Is this verified every page?" Grant said, "with digital metadata and a personal memo tying it directly to the current leadership succession plan." Harlan tried to recover. That was a different era. We were protecting shareholder value. Grant looked at him squarely. By eliminating working mothers, Harlan opened his mouth, but nothing came. Then Lena stepped forward. She hadn't been invited to speak, but no one stopped her. "Your proposal to push Grant out isn't just about leadership change. It's about burying the past with him. But some of us are done being buried." Her voice was calm. "I don't need a savior. I need a system that doesn't treat parenthood as a weakness. And I don't want an apology. I want a direction." She turned to the rest of the board. "We don't fix broken legacies by hiding them. We fix them by using truth as blueprint." There was a long pause. Then James Morey, one of the oldest board members, finally said, "I move that we terminate the succession proposal and initiate a full review of past employment policy." "I second," Linda Tran added. Motion carried. The chair confirmed. 8-3. Harlan stood there, frozen, as it all slipped through his fingers. That night, Lena and Grant sat on a park bench as June ran in circles, laughing, her arms out like airplane wings. "You did it," she said. Grant shook his head. "We did it." She looked at him carefully. "What comes next?" Grant smiled. "A new blueprint, one built in daylight." It was the first Monday in April when Calyx Innovations unveiled something that had never existed in its 15-year history. A rooftop garden, designed not for aesthetics, but for pause, for reflection, and for children. The new bridge deck, named after June Keller's original drawing, had picnic tables shaped like puzzle pieces, a chalkboard wall with rainbow writing, and one small bronze plaque that simply read, "Families Grow Companies." It had become more than a sketch, more than an idea. It had become the soul of Calyx's rebirth. That morning, Grant Whitmore walked through the garden, holding a small folded sheet of paper. It was a copy of his wife's rejected application, now sealed in a glass frame beside the main elevator. He hadn't placed it there to shame the company. He placed it there so no one would forget where they came from. Inside the central atrium, Lena Keller stood behind a podium. The press had arrived. So had the board. So had dozens of parents, community leaders, and even a few cautious competitors. She looked calm, but under the surface, her heart beat hard. She never liked cameras, never liked the way lights made everything look either polished or exposed. But she was here anyway, not because she wanted the spotlight, but because she'd earned the microphone. Behind her, a new banner read "The Whitmore Keller Foundation for Family Equity," powered by Calyx, led by community. She began softly. "When I walked into this building 6 weeks ago, I was looking for work. Not a stage, not a statement, just a way to provide for my daughter." She paused. But then something happened. A man who once buried his heart in silence saw something in my story, not as charity, not as rescue, but as recognition. She glanced at Grant. "And when we see each other truly, we create new systems, systems that protect people, that honor caregiving, that don't ask us to choose between competence and compassion." She took a breath. "This foundation will invest in single-parent job training, workplace reform consulting, and emergency childcare partnerships across the Northeast. It's not everything, but it's a start. Applause rose gently, not for show, but for truth. Later, in the hallway just outside the garden, June tugged on her mother's hand. "Mom, is this forever?" Now Lena crouched down. "What do you mean? The garden, the snacks, the jobs where people can be moms and bosses?" Lena smiled. "I hope so." June tilted her head. "What about when I grow up?" Lena's eyes shimmered. "Then you'll build even better things, and maybe you'll help someone who needs a chance, just like we did." June looked thoughtful. "Maybe I'll be a boss too." Grant walked up, crouching beside them. "I think you already are," he said. That evening, the three of them stood on the roof again. Grant, Lena, and June. No press, no applause, just wind and city lights and peace. Lena leaned against the railing. "I thought being seen would mean being judged," she said. Grant nodded. "Me too. But sometimes being seen means being understood." He looked at her. "I want to keep building. With you." She turned slowly. "That's not a small thing to say. I don't do small things anymore." A beat. Then Lena whispered, "Then don't walk away when it gets hard. Never again." The morning of the Calyx annual summit arrived with spring rain and softened skies. Hundreds gathered inside the glass-paneled auditorium. Investors, team leads, former skeptics turned advocates. The air was different now, calmer, still ambitious, but no longer cold. And somewhere near the front row sat June Keller, her feet dangling above the floor, her fingers tracing the edges of a notepad she'd titled in purple crayon, "My Ideas." At the center of the stage stood a new podium, etched with a single phrase, "Let legacy be what you change, not just what you keep." Grant Whitmore stood backstage, adjusting the cuffs of his jacket. Not to impress, but to ground himself. He wasn't here to announce earnings. He was here to step forward, not just step down. The interim CEO had been announced weeks earlier, not Harlan Grove, who had quietly resigned, but Linda Tran, a longtime advocate for equity and one of the board's few champions for the Family Forward initiative. Grant would transition to chairman of the Whitmore Keller Foundation full-time, a different kind of power, one that whispered instead of shouted. Mara approached. "They're ready," she said. He nodded once, stepped into the light. The applause was warm, but not showy. He smiled, not the polished CEO smile, but something quieter, lived in. "I used to think legacy meant buildings, products, market share." He paused. "But legacies live in people, in what we make room for, in who we listen to." He glanced down at the first row. Lena sat with her hands folded in her lap. June gave him a little wave. "I never expected my legacy to be changed by a little girl with a backpack," he said. Laughter, then quiet again. "But that's what makes it real." He looked out at the sea of faces. "I leave this stage not to leave this mission, but to carry it somewhere deeper." The Whitmore Keller Foundation will begin its first 10-city rollout this summer. We'll partner with public schools, hospitals, and tech incubators to bring resources directly to single parents. No strings, no lectures, just belief. Applause again. "And if you forget everything else I say today, remember, this leadership is not about being first. It's about making sure no one walks alone." He stepped back, and for the first time in 15 years, someone else walked to the mic. Lena. She didn't prepare remarks. She didn't need to. She just looked out and spoke from the heart. "I wasn't supposed to be here," she said softly. "I wasn't supposed to bring my daughter into a glass tower. I wasn't supposed to sit at this table or speak on this stage." She paused, and yet, here we are. She looked at June, then back at the crowd. If you're building something, anything, ask yourself, can a mother walk through your doors and feel like she belongs? Can a child draw on your whiteboard and be seen not as a distraction, but as a dream in motion? Silence. Listening. This company changed. But not because of a PR strategy. It changed because enough people stopped being afraid of the story that felt different. She smiled gently. And maybe that's all legacy really is, a story we're brave enough to rewrite. That night, long after the applause, the handshakes, and the quiet goodbyes, Lena, Grant, and June walked the now empty halls of Calyx. They stopped by the framed copy of Caroline Whitmore's old job application, now beneath a spotlight, not as shame, but as memory. June looked up at it. She was brave. "She was," Grant whispered. Lena touched the glass softly. "And so are you." They walked on. In the elevator, June asked, "Does this mean we're a family now?" Neither adult answered immediately, but when the doors opened onto the rooftop garden and June ran out laughing beneath the stars, Lena took Grant's hand. "We're something better," she said. "A foundation." Sometimes the most powerful revolutions don't start in boardrooms. They start in silence, in a child's voice echoing through a marble lobby, in a mother's quiet resilience against a system that counted her out, and in a man, once hardened by grief, who chose to listen instead of lead. This story reminds us discrimination isn't always loud. It often hides behind policies, behind resumes discarded, behind doors that quietly stay closed to those who don't fit the mold. But when courage meets compassion, when truth is spoken, change begins. So let's carry this with us. Every policy affects a person. Every person holds a story. And every story deserves to be heard with dignity. If this story touched your heart, made you think, or opened your eyes, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us shine a light on the moments and people the world too often overlooks. And don't forget to turn on notifications because the next story might just remind you of your own. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next one.